For 3 decades, Johnny Carson didn't just host a television show. He became America's nightly ritual, the familiar face that closed out the day for millions of viewers who felt they knew him intimately. Yet this feeling of familiarity was perhaps the greatest illusion Carson ever created. Behind that perfectly timed smile and that effortless Midwestern charm existed a man who guarded his inner world with almost obsessive care, revealing himself only in the briefest of moments, and only to those he deemed truly worthy of his trust. Carson built walls not out of arrogance but out of necessity, creating a character named Johnny Carson that he performed with such consistency that even those who worked alongside him for years struggled to separate the performer from the person. But among the 22,000 guests who walked through his studio doors, a select few managed to slip past those defenses, connecting with something genuine beneath the polished surface. These weren't necessarily the biggest stars or the most frequent visitors. They were the people who understood something fundamental about Carson himself, who shared his values about craft and authenticity, who could make him forget for a moment that he was performing at all. What Carson said to these chosen few in their final moments together reveals far more about the man than any scripted monologue ever could. Bob Hope represented everything Carson respected and everything he privately questioned about show business. Hope was a living legend, a comedy institution whose rapid-fire delivery and tireless work ethic had made him an American icon. Carson had grown up watching Hope, studying his timing, learning from his professionalism. Yet as Hope aged and his performances became increasingly dependent on cue cards and pre-written material, Carson found himself struggling with the gap between the legend and the reality. Those who worked closely with both men noticed Carson's discomfort during Hope's later appearances, the way he had to navigate around Hope's rigidity, compensating for the older comedian's inability to improvise or adapt in the moment. Carson had pioneered a more conversational, spontaneous approach to late-night television, and Hope's rehearsed precision felt increasingly out of step with that vision. Despite these private reservations, Carson never allowed his discomfort to show on camera, maintaining the public deference that Hope's legacy demanded. After Hope's final appearance, Carson found him backstage and offered words that perfectly captured his complicated feelings. "Thanks for everything, Bob. You never missed ever." It was an acknowledgement of Hope's legendary reliability, his absolute professionalism, the fact that in decades of performances, he always delivered exactly what he promised. Carson valued that commitment even as he preferred a different approach himself, and in that brief comment he managed to honor both the man and the distance between them. Dean Martin brought out something playful in Carson, a looseness that few other guests could inspire. With his carefully cultivated persona of the charming drunk, Martin represented a particular brand of old Hollywood cool that Carson clearly admired, even envied. Martin's appearances were exercises in controlled chaos, deliberately missing his chair, forgetting questions mid-answer, derailing planned segments with such casual grace that it seemed almost accidental. But Carson, who ran his show with military precision, recognized the skill required to make such spontaneity look effortless. Martin never took the talk show format seriously, arriving without carefully rehearsed anecdotes or talking points, willing to let the conversation go wherever it needed to go. For Carson, who spent every night managing expectations and controlling outcomes, Martin's freedom must have seemed intoxicating. During their final on-air exchange, as Martin prepared to leave the stage, Carson told him not to change, that the world needed at least one guy who never took it seriously. Those who heard it recognized the comment as something more than professional courtesy. It was genuine appreciation for qualities Carson himself couldn't afford to display, a kind of wistful acknowledgement that Martin possessed a liberty Carson had sacrificed for the demands of his nightly performance. George Burns represented a living connection to comedy's origins, a bridge to vaudeville and early American entertainment that Carson, ever the student of his craft, deeply respected. Burns continued performing well into his 90s, and Carson treated each of his appearances with special preparation, researching more carefully, thinking more deeply about questions, approaching the segments almost as a student rather than just a host. Burns once said that if Johnny Carson liked you, you were bulletproof, acknowledging the extraordinary power Carson wielded in the entertainment industry. Carson demonstrated his appreciation through both his on-air treatment and his private comments to staff, always giving Burns the deference due to comedy royalty. During Burns's final appearance, Carson remarked on air that George was the only guy he knew who got funnier every year, a comment that reflected genuine admiration for Burns's continued vitality as a performer. What Carson particularly respected was that Burns kept evolving his act, refusing to coast on his legend status, still creating and finding new ways to connect with audiences. For Carson, who was always conscious of generational changes in comedy and his own place within that evolution, Burns offered something increasingly rare as his tenure extended, the opportunity to be the student rather than the master, learning from someone who had been performing since Carson was a child. When Lucille Ball appeared on The Tonight Show, it represented the meeting of two television pioneers who had each revolutionized their respective corners of the medium. Carson treated Ball with a deference he reserved for almost no one else, viewing her not as a guest but as an equal, one of the only performers he seemed to see that way. Those who worked on Ball's appearances noticed a different energy when they were together, almost like watching colleagues rather than a host and guest. Their final on-air appearance featured warm banter and visible mutual admiration, but what viewers didn't see was Carson's more personal expression of appreciation after the cameras stopped rolling. According to those present backstage, Carson approached Ball and told her simply that she was the real deal, always had been. It was an acknowledgement of her groundbreaking contributions to television and her legendary work ethic, a recognition of everything she had built and everything she represented. When Ball died in 1989, Carson did something he rarely did for any celebrity. He devoted a segment of his show to a heartfelt tribute, temporarily setting aside his usual emotional restraint to acknowledge her passing. For a man who kept his personal feelings strictly separated from his professional performance, this willingness to publicly mourn represented a rare break in his carefully maintained boundaries, a testament to the genuine connection between two performers who had each transformed television and understood the costs of that transformation. Jack Benny's influence on Carson's performance style was undeniable and openly acknowledged. Benny's perfect timing, his masterful use of the pause, his willingness to be the butt of the joke rather than its deliverer, all of these qualities found echoes in Carson's approach to hosting. During Benny's appearances, viewers saw Carson in a role he rarely assumed, the appreciative student paying homage to a revered teacher. Carson would actually defer to Benny in a way he never did with anyone else, setting up situations for Benny to shine and then sitting back to watch the master. It was a complete reversal of Carson's usual approach to controlling the show's rhythm, a surrender of power that spoke to his deep respect for Benny's craft. After what would be Benny's final appearance, Carson reportedly told him privately that Benny had taught him how to listen. The comment captured something essential about what Carson had learned from studying Benny's performances, particularly the power of the reactive pause rather than the aggressive punchline. Carson often said that Benny taught him the pause is funnier than the punchline, and he had studied Benny's timing obsessively early in his career, analyzing how Benny could build anticipation and turn silence into comedy gold. This technical appreciation evolved into genuine personal admiration, with Carson viewing Benny not just as a skilled performer, but as comedy royalty who had helped shape his own approach to entertainment. Burt Reynolds brought out Carson's mischievous side with remarkable consistency. Their legendary on-air rapport, characterized by practical jokes, surprise water fights, and unscripted banter, created some of The Tonight Show's most memorable and genuinely spontaneous moments. Reynolds understood instinctively what Carson called the game, the delicate balance between entertainment and authenticity that Carson strived for but rarely achieved with celebrity guests. Their playful rivalry began when Reynolds spontaneously hit Carson in the face with a can of shaving cream during what was supposed to be a straightforward interview. Rather than being annoyed by this disruption, Carson was delighted, and a legendary television friendship was born. During Reynolds' final appearance on Carson's Tonight Show, the host told him not to ever stop coming back, that he needed someone to keep him honest. Those who worked on the show understood what Carson meant. He valued Reynolds for his willingness to puncture the artificial nature of celebrity interviews, to introduce unpredictability into the normally structured format of late-night television. Reynolds never took himself too seriously, and in an industry full of carefully managed images and egos, his willingness to be the butt of jokes, to look foolish, to prioritize entertainment over vanity, struck Carson as incredibly refreshing. This appreciation extended beyond their on-screen chemistry. Carson often cited Reynolds as one of the only guests who could catch him off guard in a good way, creating genuine reactions rather than the practiced responses he delivered to most interview subjects. Carol Burnett held a special place in Carson's professional universe as a performer whose natural warmth, quick wit, and complete lack of pretension made her a welcome presence throughout his tenure. Unlike many guests who approached their appearances as promotional opportunities, Burnett seemed genuinely invested in creating entertaining television. Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon that Carol brought sunshine to the stage, and what distinguished Burnett from most other guests was Carson's willingness to cede control of his carefully orchestrated show whenever she appeared. He would let her segments run long, allow her to interact directly with the audience, and even permit her to take over portions of the show on occasion. This trust was evident in the freedom Carson gave Burnett, a stark contrast to his typically tight management of format and pacing. Staff members recalled Carson saying backstage before her segments to just let Carol do whatever she wants because she never disappoints. After what would be her final appearance on Carson's Tonight Show, colleagues recalled that he told her backstage that if he could build a show around just one person, it would be her. What Carson appreciated most about Burnett was her genuine joy in performing. She wasn't there to promote something or build her brand. She was there to create something fun with Carson, a true collaboration rather than an interview. This collaborative spirit created a visible change in Carson whenever Burnett appeared, a relaxation of his normal professional boundaries, and a willingness to follow wherever she led the conversation. Bob Newhart and Johnny Carson shared a comedic sensibility that created immediate kinship. Both men specialized in understatement, perfect timing, and the ability to find humor in life's mundane moments without resorting to broad comedy or excessive energy. Carson once called Newhart the most effortlessly funny man he knew, probably the highest compliment Carson could give because effortlessness was what he himself strived for every night. What made Newhart's appearances special was the visible relaxation in Carson's demeanor, a sense that he was conversing with a kindred spirit rather than performing an interview. Their shared Midwestern sensibilities and similar approaches to comedy created a natural rhythm that required no effort or management from either man. Those who watched them work together described it as seeing two jazz musicians who instinctively knew when to play and when to lay back, their timing so complementary that neither tried to dominate, both enhancing the other's performance. This professional appreciation evolved into genuine friendship, with the two men occasionally playing golf together, a rare inclusion into Carson's closely guarded private life that few celebrities ever experienced. After what would be Newhart's final appearance, Carson privately told him that nobody made it look easier, but he knew how hard Newhart worked. It was a recognition of the careful craft that went into Newhart's seemingly effortless comedy, something Carson understood intimately from his own experience. Carson saw himself in Newhart in many ways, both creating humor through precision rather than volume, through timing rather than histrionics, both making it look simple despite the enormous skill involved. This mutual understanding created a comfort level that translated into some of the Tonight Show's most natural and engaging conversations, exchanges that felt less like interviews and more like eavesdropping on two masters discussing their craft. Of all the thousands of celebrity interactions that occurred during Carson's 3 decades as host, One stands above all others for its emotional impact, and the rare glimpse it offered into Carson's closely guarded heart. In 1981, Jimmy Stewart appeared on the show, and with Carson's encouragement, read a poem he had written about his beloved dog who had recently died. The simple, heartfelt verses about his golden retriever's quirks and the empty space left by his passing created one of television's most genuine moments. As Stewart finished reading, Carson, famous for his emotional restraint, was visibly moved, briefly tearing up on camera before simply saying thank you for sharing that. This moment represents one of the only times Carson allowed himself to display genuine vulnerability on national television. For a man who built his career on cool professionalism and emotional control, this brief crack in the facade was extraordinary. After the cameras stopped rolling, Carson approached Stewart backstage, embraced him, and said he would never forget that Stewart had just given them something real. That night changed something in Carson's approach to the show. He realized that allowing genuine emotion, carefully and selectively, could create more powerful television than perfect control ever could. Stewart, with his own Midwestern restraint and genuine humility, had managed to connect with Carson on a level few others ever reached, creating a moment of shared humanity that transcended the typical host-guest dynamic and revealed the man behind the carefully constructed persona. What these final exchanges reveal isn't just Carson's personal preferences, but something more fundamental about the man himself, his deeply held values, his professional philosophy, and what he truly respected in others beyond fame or popularity. Carson admired craftsmanship, the technical mastery demonstrated by performers like Benny and Newhart, whose seemingly effortless humor represented years of careful refinement. He valued authenticity, the genuine warmth of Burnett, the unvarnished emotionality of Stewart. He appreciated those who understood that entertainment should never be subordinated to ego. Carson's favorite guests were the ones who shared his fundamental values about what made good television. Performers who took their work seriously without taking themselves too seriously. People who understood that connection with the audience mattered more than personal promotion. These relationships offered rare glimpses behind Carson's famous reserve, moments when the consummate professional allowed himself to be simply a man expressing genuine appreciation for people who had touched his life in meaningful ways. For someone as private as Carson, these connections were significant. He didn't let many people in, personally or professionally, and the ones who made it through that barrier had earned something truly rare. Perhaps Carson's greatest gift wasn't just his perfect timing or his unmatched interviewing skills, but his selective vulnerability, his willingness to occasionally let us see past the polished performance to the genuine human connection beneath. In those rare moments, we weren't just watching a talk show host, we were witnessing something authentic and unscripted, a real person responding to another real person. These weren't just famous faces. They were the people who made Johnny Carson lower his guard and open his heart, and in those final moments with each, we caught glimpses of the real man behind the desk.